This video is a walkthrough of a paper 1. We're going to do the short answer questions. It's a paper 1 for Edexcel. It's this paper, Monday the 20th of May 2019. My suggestion is go and do the multiple choice and then come back and we can sort of compare the answers that we get. We'll start here with question 1. Question 1 reads, between 2016 and 2017, the average price of new build homes in the UK rose by an estimated 5.4%. With reference to the data provided, calculate the price elasticity of supply for new house builds between 2016 and 2017. You were advised to show your working. So price elasticity of supply is going to be the percent changed in supply over the percent change in price. We already have our percent change in price, right? That's up here, 5.4%. So we already know what's going on the bottom. Our PES is going to be 5.4 on the bottom. What we need to find is the component that's going to go on the top, which will be our percent change in quantity supplied. The way we're going to do that is we're going to go from 2016 to 2017, 162,880 minus 1,340,612 over 1,340,612. So we're taking our newer number, subtracting our original number, and then dividing by the original number to get that change as a percentage of our original number. And I'm going to multiply that then by 100. If I put this into a calculator, I'm going to get 21%. And I'm going to then put 21 over 5.4. And if I divide these two, I'm going to get my price elasticity of supply of 3.9%. 3.9, we don't need to express it as a percentage. So 3.9 is our price elasticity of supply. Basically what this is saying is if we get a, say, 10% increase in our price, we're then going to get a 39% increase in our supply. So the reaction of our supply to price is 3.9 times the change in price. And they're both expressed as percentages. This is very elastic because it indicates that even small changes in price are resulting in big changes in UK house supply. Part B says a 2.5% increase in new built homes in one region of the UK causes a 10% increase in the number of houses being built. Ceteris paribus, this suggests that the supply of a new home builds is, and then we get 4 options that are basically showing the degrees of elasticity of the supply. So A is price elasticity of supply. A is perfectly price elastic. B is perfectly price inelastic. So there's 2 things that we're paying attention to here, right? One is the elastic versus inelastic. We can see a 2.5% increase in new home build prices is leading to a 10% increase in supply. So the change in supply is more significant than the change in the price. This suggests that we have an elastic relationship, and I can therefore disregard B and D because those are both inelastic, and this is clearly an elastic relationship. If we had 2.5% and then there's a 1% change in the number of houses being built, that would be an inelastic relationship. And then we're looking at whether this is perfectly or relatively inelastic. We're not, like, perfectly elastic would mean basically that there's like an infinity is our price elasticity of supply. That's not what's happening here. So this is relatively price elastic. We've got it's a significant relationship. It looks like it's about 4, but it's not infinity, right? So this is not perfectly price elastic at all. This is a relatively price elastic product. So we can ignore A, and C is going to be our correct answer. 1C says, explain one factor that is likely to determine the price elasticity of supply of new house builds. So there are a bunch of factors that you could look at. We're interested here, this is a 2-marker, 1 knowledge and 1 analysis. So that's going to be correctly identifying a factor and then explaining the factor. So what we could talk about is maybe limited availability of input goods. a limited availability of input goods. And I'd want to sort of identify one specifically, so we could talk about maybe land. That then makes it hard for suppliers to respond to price increases. Which makes supply inelastic. Right, so if it's hard to maybe find the land necessary to build homes, we're then going to have a price inelastic supply. But you could also talk about the availability of other input goods. We could also think about things like planning permissions and regulations. If regulations are stricter, it's going to be harder for suppliers to respond to changes in price. We could also think maybe about how long it takes to produce homes. So if it's taking, really quickly, you'd think building a home the fastest possible time would be like maybe 3 months, 4 months. So if you get a price change in like now, it's going to take a long time before suppliers are able to respond to that by ramping up production, right? So like even if I start building 10 new homes today, it's going to take 4 months before those are available on the market. So price elasticity of supply, with that delay, it's not going to be super responsive. Like supply is not going to be super responsive to price. So this is one answer. There are several that you could provide there. Question 2 says, in August of 2017, Hurricane Harvey caused the closure of nearly a quarter of the oil production capacity in the United States. Draw a supply and demand diagram to show the likely microeconomic effects of the hurricane on the oil market in the US. Okay, so this is ultimately affecting supply because we're talking about closing oil production. So our demand curve is we're just going to have probably one demand curve. And then because we're closing down production, we're going to expect that to result in a leftward shift in supply. So we're reducing the number of producers operating on the market. And quickly, we're going to want to make sure that we always mark out our points. So this is, I do QE for equilibrium, PE for equilibrium, and then P1 here, Q1, and then indicating the changes. So we get a rise in price, a decrease in quantity available. I'm going to put price here. I'm going to put quantity here. So you want to make sure you're always labeling this fully. And we're identifying here our equilibrium price and our new equilibrium price, P1, Q1. This is, basically just the effect of shutting down the production. There's less supply in the market, so prices go up, and the quantity at the bottom indicates that reduction in supply. B shows, the diagrams below show movements from position X to Y on a production possibility frontier. In which one of the diagrams does the movement from X to Y illustrate the most likely impact on the US economy of a natural disaster such as Hurricane Harvey? So right away, when I'm looking at these production possibility frontiers, it's not going to be B or D, because both of these are indicating some version of like increasing output. D is effectively impossible, right? Because you've got, or this would be potentially temporary overproduction, could be possible, but long-term D is not possible because you are exceeding the production possibility frontier, which is the maximum output of your economy. So D is just not possible. Both of these are going to be incorrect because they're showing like increases in economic growth, which wouldn't make much sense if you're having a natural disaster that's like destroying infrastructure, presumably hurting people economically. So I'm then turning my attention to A and C. C, like A looks promising, right? Because it shows like a reduction in economic output. We're moving from X to Y. That makes sense given a natural disaster. So I'm considering A. C shows basically a different choice between consumer goods and capital goods. My issue with this is there's not really anything in the information they're providing us that indicates why you would shift your production to consumer goods from capital goods. So I'm going to also ignore C, and I'm going to say A is the correct answer. Okay, question 3 reads, according to the Royal Mail, more hair and beauty salons opened on UK High Street last year than any other type of independent business, with a net increase of 10% representing 626 new salons. A reads, the UK hair and beauty industry is an example of monopolistic competition because And there's 4 options. A is firms spend nothing on advertising and research. B reads the industry is dominated by a few large firms. C, the products are homogeneous. And D, there are low barriers to entry and exit. So I think it's important to answer this question to just quickly go over what monopolistic competition is, which is normally a market where there are a lot of firms competing, but each firm is offering a differentiated product. So this is like saying, there are lots of hair and beauty salons in the UK, but each one has maybe a different style or an approach. Consumers are going to have preferences about where they get their nails done or like where they go to get their hair cut because a certain barber does their hair in a way that they like, or a certain hairdresser does their hair in a way that they like. So looking through these options, A, firms spend nothing on advertising and research. One, we don't know very much about advertising and research in this context. We would also assume if firms are differentiated, they probably are going to spend some money on advertising. I don't know about research in sort of salons necessarily, but we would expect some spending on advertising because the firms are differentiated and they need to build a brand. B reads, the industry is dominated by a few large firms. Again, this would be true maybe of an oligopoly, but we're talking about monopolistic competition, which by definition has lots of firms. C, the products are homogeneous. Again, absolutely not true in monopolistic competition. The core definition of monopolistic competition is that the products are differentiated. D is the only one, therefore, that makes sense. It says there are low barriers to entry and exit. This again makes sense given there are going to be lots of firms competing in the market. So we would expect it to be relatively easy for firms to enter the market. It's really important to understand the difference between monopolistic competition and a monopoly. This will trip some people up. This is not a monopoly market structure. This is monopolistic competition. A monopoly is going to have only one firm, whereas monopolistic competition will have very many firms. But where the similarity lies between a monopoly and a monopolistic competition is they're each offering something unique and not necessarily competing on price with consumers. Part B says draw a cost and revenue diagram to show the long-run equilibrium of a firm in monopolistic competition. So this is going to look quite similar to a monopoly diagram. We're going to have 2 revenue curves. We're going to have an average revenue curve here, a marginal revenue curve here. We're going to show a marginal cost curve here. And this is a very important part because this is the long-run equilibrium. There will not be supernormal profit in this diagram. In the long run, we have the entrance of new firms into monopolistic competition, attracted by the supernormal profit being earned by existing firms in that market, and that drives down the demand for each individual firm because there are more competitors and so more companies that split demand in the market. And that drives down these average revenue curve and the marginal revenue curve to a point where firms no longer make a profit and your average cost curve is, boom, here. And so this is going to show the equilibrium in the long run, price, quantity here. And this is also going to be along the line where marginal cost equals marginal revenue, because this is generally the level of quantity that's going to be set by firms in monopolistic competition, because it's the profit maximizing point. Of course, in this context, they aren't making a profit, but in the short run, they would have been generating a profit for their business. This is going to be costs and revenue on the y-axis. This is going to be output on the bottom. So it should actually be O instead of P. Okay, 4 says, in 2016, the life insurance group eSure undertook a demerger with its GoCompare price comparison website. The most likely reason for this demerger was to A, benefit from external economies of scale, B, benefit from internal economies of scale, C, focus on its core business, or D, increase its market share. So a demerger is basically going to be splitting eSure from GoCompare. That means you're certainly not benefiting from internal economies of scale, right? Because you are actually reducing the size of your business. So like, if you're merged with business, you're more likely to benefit from internal economies of scale, which are economies of scale tied to the size of your business. reducing the size of your business would mean that you no longer benefit from whatever economies of scale you had. Similarly, like, this doesn't necessarily have that much of a relationship for like external economies of scale. There's not much information about like whether or not you are in a larger industry that is offering you external economies of scale, which would be like, you know, your business is operating in a market with lots of other similar businesses, so there's like a good labor pool for your business, and like maybe there's some technological transfer going on between different businesses, so like you benefit from being in a large similar industry of similar businesses. There's not really much information about this, so I'm gonna assume that this is generally not true, and it's unclear why like demerging would necessarily affect your external economies of scale. Finally, we've got C, focus more on its core business, and D, increase its market share. So D can't be the answer, right? Because again, we're reducing the size of the business, presumably then we're reducing the sales and revenue. So C has to be our answer, focus more on its core business. That makes sense because a price comparison website and insurance are sort of related, but they're not like the same type of service. So we would think maybe cutting out the Go Compare website is going to improve my my core business. It's going to allow me to focus more. B says, calculate using the information provided the total costs of Go Compare in 2016. Okay, so we've got a profit here. Okay, we've got a percentage up 26.5% on 2016. Total revenue was 75.8 million, up 4.6% from 2016. Okay, so my profit for a business is going to equal my total revenue minus my total costs. So if I want to calculate total costs, I'm looking at total revenue minus profit, just to rearrange the equation. What we can then do is we can look at calculating the profit here, which says 75. We're looking for 2016, right? So this is the tricky bit, is they've given us data for 2017, but we're trying to find total costs for 2016. So what we're going to try and do then is find my total revenue and profit for 2016. So total revenue then, if I take my 2017 number, which is 75.8 million, that's my total revenue from 2017, and then I divide that by 1.041, which is basically like taking my percentage increase, which is this 4.1 bit, and I'm dividing it by 1.041 because I'm trying to take it back down. If I divide by 0.041, I'm going to end up with like a crazy high number, which is not going to help me. This is going to reduce my value a bit. It's going to take me down to 72.8. Another way of thinking about this is if you wanted to calculate a 4.1% increase from the 2016 number, you would multiply that 2016 number, 72.8, by 1.04. So this is kind of rearranging the formula where we divide by that value enough, again, to like reverse that process. And I'll do the same thing with my profit from 2016. So that's 17.5 million. I'm going to divide it by 1.215, which is like I'm taking this 21.5% value. And that's going to give me 14.4 million. And then if I want to find my profit, or my total costs, I'm going to just go, for 2016, I'm just going to go total revenue, 72.8 minus profits, 14.4, and that's going to equal 58.4 million. And you're going to want to make sure you put all the sign, like you want to put the pound sign, you want to put the million here as well. If you just put down like 58.4, you're going to drop marks. Because that's not the answer. 5 says, Free market economics is being challenged. The arguments for and against are being increasingly discussed within many countries. Okay, that's not telling me very much. 5A says explain how resources are allocated in a free market economy. There are different ways that you can approach answering this. You're going to want to make sure that you're definitely talking about the price mechanism. I would say, like, just to basically guarantee that you get all the points for this, you would say effectively, like, prices are allocated by the price mechanism. Sorry, goods are allocated and resources are allocated by the price mechanism. You're looking for 2 marks here, right? So that normally means 1 knowledge and 1 analysis. So this is the answer. This is kind of knowledge. But I might also say sort of private companies. Your analysis is explaining what you mean. So private companies and individuals adjust their consumption or production in response to price changes. So like prices are used to ration goods. Okay. B says, which of the following statements is true? A says Friedrich Hayek believed that government should subsidize inefficient home farms. This is untrue. Hayek is a sort of laissez-faire economist and is one of the biggest proponents of government non-intervention. So he prefers that private investment determines, like, that basically private entities determine where investment goes in the economy, and that, like, governments shouldn't intervene to determine where that investment goes in the form of taxing people and then subsidizing where they believe is best. B says Friedrich Hayek was a key advocate of command economies as a way of allocating resources. So for a very similar reason, B is not correct, right? Again, he's a laissez-faire economist, very much a proponent of the free market. Karl Marx advocated allocating resources via the free market. No, this is the Marx from Marxism, right? So he is a big proponent of not having private property and not having private control of resources. So very much the opposite end of the spectrum, and he would not be a fan of allocating resources via the free market. D says Karl Marx criticized private ownership of factors of production. This is correct, right? Again, for similar reasons. He is basically opposed to private property. Adam Smith described the benefits of specialization and the division of labor. Examine or explain one advantage of a firm using a division of labor when organizing its productive process. So 2 marker, again, this generally means 1 knowledge and 1 analysis. So your knowledge is basically going to be identifying one advantage, and your analysis is explaining this. So we could use a bunch of examples here. Those would include, say, lowering, like not needing as much training. Like you don't have to spend as much on training. You could speed up the process of production. You could increase the skill of each individual worker who's now specialized on performing one particular task. I would also think about like maybe cutting down the time wasted from switching tasks. Let's go with one advantage would be, and my handwriting is stunning as always, one advantage would be cutting down training costs, as each worker only needs to be trained in one task. In one task. This lowers training costs and and boosts productive efficiency. All right.